Welcome to those of you who are online. We're very happy today to have Dr. David Higgins. He received his doctorate from University of Lausanne, Switzerland in 2012. He subsequently held a position as a postdoc research fellow in the Department of South Asian, Tibetan, and Buddhist Studies at the University of Vienna. I think that's the first time I met you was there, long time ago, where he explored the relationship between Mahamudra and Madhyamaka philosophies in Kagyu scholasticism during the post-classical period, 15th and 16th century. His research interests include Indo-Tibetan Buddhist philosophy and epistemology, with a particular focus on the Kagyu Mahamudra and Nyingma Dzogchen doctrine and practices. So please welcome David.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you so much for the invitation. I came here, I guess, 6 weeks ago because I'm near the end of a translation project of the 8th Karmapa's Umalajukpa commentary, and I wanted to be in an auspicious place around auspicious people to finish it, and it's a good place to do work, I found. The topic I'm talking about today kind of has been with me a long time. Just if you kind of read Kagyu and Nyingma texts, you'll come across this doctrine of the unity of the two truths, or inseparability of the two truths, non-duality of the two truths. And for these traditions, it's considered like a really central part of their philosophy and practice. So about a year and a half ago, I was asked to come to my old PhD supervisor, Tom Tillemann's Festschrift. And I thought, there's certainly going to be a lot of people talking about the two truths there. And I knew that, because of my background is a little different than some of the others, I wanted to do something completely different. So I presented this. I'll try not to repeat exactly what I did there. There's so much in this doctrine, and even in the meantime, just through reading the 8th Karmapa's Umalajukpa commentary, it's like the philosophical heart of his understanding of Madhyamaka, as well as Mahamudra. So I'll just get right into it. So the article basically is going to be looking at the substance and significance of this still little known doctrine, the unity of truth, with the goal to shed new light on its rich legacy and intriguing philosophical permutations. And it was kind of offered in a spirit of collegiality to Tom, because he, at one point in one of his articles, said, I'll just quote him here. It's in an article called "How Far Can a Madhyamaka Reform Customary Truth?" And in that, he raises the question of whether we can retain a Buddhist account of the two truths that relinquishes both metaphysical realism and also the typical prasangika response to it, the contention that customary truth is completely erroneous for the profane and purely fictional for noble beings. And he, at that time, suggested as a viable alternative to this sort of double whammy of error theory and panfictionalism, to see the two truths as, quote, a rung on a ladder that we climb to finally know better a unitary world, one that was there all along, but veiled by conceptually created dichotomies and ignorance. And then he pointed to Rong Zompa's understanding of the inseparability of the two truths. So I thought, that's a good opportunity, a little sort of lead in to explore this topic. So there's general agreement among scholars of the Nyingma and Kagyu traditions that the doctrine known as the inseparability of the two truths, dbyer, marks the culmination of Buddhist thinking about truth. The Nyingma polymath Longchenpa, for example, claims in the 18th chapter of his Wish-Fulfilling Treasury that this doctrine represents the definitive quintessence of all Buddhist attempts to capture the way things are, Nelug. Oh, these are worth dwelling on. I'll leave this slide there for a minute just so you can soak it in. As a view first glimpsed via the inner tantras, it is said to transcend the different bivalent conceptions of truth advanced by different schools of Buddhist philosophy, which are all in one way or another predicated on dubious realist attributions of truth and falsity to perceptions, propositions, and most faithfully to the world itself. Tibetan proponents of the view framed it as the final cure for metaphysical realism. This is this term, ngupu nrawa, or vastuvāda. And this is the view that the objects, properties, and relations the world contains exist independently of how and whether we perceive, experience, or think about them. And this is sort of the central target of a lot of Madhyamaka philosophy, this realist view that there are real entities with real properties. So some 2.5 centuries before Longchenpa, the 11th century Nyingmapa Rongzom, I'm not using his full name because you all know these people by now, had identified the inseparability of truth as the highest view of equality, nyamnyi, of all phenomena, that's first recognized in the lower tantras, but fully realized only in the great perfection, or dzogchen. And to quote Rongzom, he says, finally, in the great perfection system, all phenomena are said to be in the state of great equality, beyond acceptance or rejection. But this is not taught using the nomenclature of two truths, for it is said that all phenomena are indivisible. I'm just doing a bit of skipping and skimming because I know that I tend to meander. So roughly half a millennium after Rongzampa, the 8th Karmapa Mikyo Dorje characterized the middle way based on the unity of the two truths as the view that ultimately all phenomena, quote, are not grounded in any speculative extremes such as existence or non-existence, arising or cessation, and are also free from any foundation that could be called a middle. So this is sort of excluding the middle as well. In his final masterwork, which is a commentary on Karma Pakshi's direct introduction to the three embodiments, which I'll just call embodiments from now on, which contains his most extensive exposition of the unity of truth doctrine, Mikyo Dorje extols, quote, this excellent Madhyamaka tradition of all who claim that the ultimate and conventional truths are of the same nature. And interestingly, he there names Rongzampa as a leading Tibetan proponent of this tradition. So I discovered in looking at Mikyo Dorje's writings that in his final great work, the Kusum Ngotru Namshe on Karma Pakshi's Kusum Ngotru, he became quite a fan of Rongzampa, and he considered him the first, I guess, Tibetan who truly understood this inseparability of the two-truth doctrine. So he clarifies, this is Mikyo Dorje, clarifies in his Madhyamakavatara commentary that the two truths are neither the same nor different. More precisely, they are neither different aspects of a single essence, Ngobo Chig Dogpatade, a view that he ascribes to the Gelugpa, nor are they a dichotomy based on negating identity, a view he ascribes to the Jonang. So we find this attempt to steer a middle course between a strong dualist view, where the two truths represent what Dolpopa called two great kingdoms that are entirely separate from one another and have nothing to do with one another. On the other hand, he tries to avoid the idea of kind of like a monism, that everything's just all one. So and that's more on the side of the Gelugpa. So these sameness and identity accounts of the two truths, he says, are fallacious because the former blurs the crucial distinction between conditions of bondage and freedom. And this kind of argument you find a lot in texts like the Sandhi Nirmochana as well, that if you don't distinguish the conventional and ultimate, then sentient beings would already be Buddhas without having to make the slightest difference, because there would just be one homogeneous reality that we are all fortunate enough to partake of. On the other hand, if you make a bright line distinction between the conventional and ultimate, then there'd be no hope for a sentient being ever to become a Buddha, because they're two great kingdoms, like Dolpopa said, that have nothing to do with each other. So the Mikyu Dorje, like a lot of his co-religionists, was always trying to navigate a middle course between a type of monism and a strongly dualistic position. So I've broken halfway through a sentence. So the former blurs the distinction between conditions of bondage and freedom, while the latter, in positing the conventional and ultimate as two great kingdoms, situates the ultimate beyond space and time and dependent arising, and thus beyond the reach of any mind intent on liberation from error and confusion. So for Mikyu Dorje, the reason the two truths are in the final analysis inseparable lies precisely in the fact that there's no warrant for ontologically distinguishing appearance and reality. And this is kind of the continuing or repeating refrain that I explore in this talk, that there is a real problem with creating or imposing this truth versus fiction or reality versus appearance distinction. And it's something that these thinkers I'll be looking at really challenged in really interesting ways, I think, because it impacts not only how you think about the two truths, but it's got huge implications for meditation and practice as well. So Mikyu Dorje could have been speaking for many of his co-religionists when he says in his embodiments, quote, "So long as the mind has not let go of reifying the two truths in terms of true and false, and there persists conceptual reasoning that clings to and believes in them, it will never dwell in the lofty state of the equality of the two truths, the inseparability of the two truths, single taste of the two truths, and unity of the two truths." So given the centrality of this doctrine, it became kind of surprising to me how little attention it's garnered in contemporary Buddhist scholarship on the two truths. I know all sorts of scholars who are working on fascinating material where that's the central, if you like, the kind of central thesis in a lot of these works, but it's just not something that's got a lot of attention in especially in the academic world. So my aim in this is just to shed light on this doctrine, show a bit of its provenance, like also its scope, and some of its philosophical significance at the end. So the question of provenance, switch slides here. So this doctrine seems to have first, depending on which scholar you're looking at, some of them will say, well, it's been there all along in the Madhyamaka tradition of Nagarjuna. And that to an extent that's true, because even the certain stanzas in the Mula Madhyamaka Karika is that the limit of samsara is also the limit of nirvana, and other such stanzas, they do point in that direction. But according to our authors, it really gained traction in the sort of later stage of tantric Buddhism in India, and it was associated with figures like Tilopa, Saraha, Indrabhuti, Sahavajra, Vajrapani, Alanka Kalasha, and Maitripada. Especially Maitripada was important. His circle really made this doctrine central to their whole philosophy and practice. So the doctrine's genesis thus coincided with the later diffusion of Buddhism in Tibet, which began in the 11th century. During this time, the doctrine found fertile soil in the scholasticism of the ancient and new Tibetan Buddhist schools, which were actively engaged not only in assimilating Buddhist teachings from India, not least of all tantric ones, but also in developing new ways of interpreting and practicing them. In this fruitful climate of doctrinal formation and scholastic elaboration, a teaching that had only recently emerged on the tantric fringes of Indian society was taken up not only as, not only as a subject of avid debate and interest, but also as an indispensable path toward a deeper understanding of the two truths. But from at least as early as the 11th century, questions arose amongst Tibetan scholar practitioners as to the provenance of this doctrine, like where in a person's path does this come into play, whether it's already there in the Madhyamaka or whether it really comes to the fore in the Mantrayana or Vajrayana teachings. The two Nyingmapa, as I mentioned above, Rong Zampa and Longchenpa, maintain that the inseparability of truth is first recognized in the Mantrayana practice, but here too their observations differ. And the difference probably has more to do with the doxography of their times, like the way Tantra, the different systems of Tantra were understood, than any substantive difference. So for Rong Zampa, the practitioner gains a first glimpse of this inseparability of truth in the outer tantras when, quote, the view of equality that realizes the inseparability of the ultimate and conventional is first attained, albeit to a small degree. So he says that when you start doing deity practice visualizations and so on and see that that the world is fundamentally divine in nature, that's when you first get a glimpse of the inseparability of truth. This insight is subsequently attained to a medium degree in the inner Mahayoga and fully realized in great perfection, according to Rongzom. For Longchenpa, however, the recognition of the inseparability of truth is first recognized via the inner tantras when one finally abandons any ontological or meta-ontological concerns and glimpses the divine nature of conventional phenomena. And his explanation is interesting. He says, this is again in his Wish-Fulfilling Treasury, the 18th chapter, which is on this topic of the inseparability of the truth. Interestingly, Longchenpa says the inseparability of truth, denpa yerme, not denni yerme, because he's already beyond the binary formulation, I guess. So he says most Mantrayana practitioners nowadays, for most of them, the views of the three outer tantras are similar to the great vehicle of characteristics insofar as one ascertains that things are ultimately of the nature of being totally unestablished. So his reason for saying that you first gain full recognition of the inseparability of truths is that in the outer tantras, they're still somewhat dualistic and there's still an attempt to just find the unestablished nature of phenomena. Whereas the inner tantras are much more direct and visionary in character. He adds that it's through the three inner tantras that the conventional itself appears as divine in nature, and truth is therefore known to be inseparable. Mikyu Dorje, for his part, at a later time, traces the inseparability of truth view to the Madhyamaka equation of emptiness and dependent arising, but he also claims that its full realization is only gained through Mantrayana. In his embodiments, he characterizes unity of truth as a doctrine discerned by, quote, those who appeared in former generations, like the glorious Lord Saraha, the noble Nagarjuna. So he's including the sort of forefather of Madhyamaka, the venerable Shavaripa. We should advance this slide. The green names are kind of just mainstream Indian Madhyamaka. The blue ones are more from the later tantric stages, and then Rongzom, of course, is a Nyingmapa. Where was I? Shavaripa, the teacher of Buddha Palita, Chandrakirti, and Master Maitripa. Thus, in the same manner that the subject of the two truths was ascertained by the Lord Maitripa and the exalted Atisha, so it appears to have been explained by the Mahapandita Rongzom Chusang. So despite these thinkers' somewhat different opinions about the provenance of the doctrine, they commonly held that it was anticipated in Indian Madhyamaka thought, but that it reached its most lucid and thorough articulation in the Mantrayana. And that's where the practitioner fully comes to realize the inseparability of the two truths. So it's sort of important, it probably doesn't need to be said, but it's probably important to recognize that in the shift from sort of a more intellectual, analytical understanding of the two truths to this inseparability of truth doctrine, we're moving to a much more experiential type of understanding. And they comment on that all the time, that you kind of have to leave behind all these, what they call like binary, reciprocally determined ideas, good, bad, false, true, all these things. I've become really enamored of Mipam's Usil Ningpo, because it's such a concise commentary in the Guya Garba, and there the inseparability of truth is just front and center of all of his understanding of Vajrayana. So for these unity of truth theorists, what was at stake is not an ontological distinction between different kinds or realms of being, but a phenomenological, or you could say epistemological distinction between more or less reifying modes of cognition. And this is I say a crucial point, because in Indian philosophy, no less than in Western philosophy, there's this long-standing tradition of distinguishing reality from appearance, and then fretting about whether and how we can peer behind the veil of appearance to gain access to what really is. And also, as much as prasangika, Madhyamaka became the default metaphysical or philosophical position in Tibet, it's deeply this dichotomy between the sort of the true reality of the Aryas versus the total fictions perceived by ordinary people is really, really strongly entrenched in that tradition. And to the extent that it reads a lot like, and I'm really sympathetic to the tradition. I'm just telling you this because I'm working on this stuff with Miki Dorje every day. But it's, it is very much like a kind of Advaita Vedanta, where you have to get behind the veil of appearance to get at something real. So according to these later thinkers, when you move to the more Vajrayana perspective, this overwrought dichotomy turns out to be mistaken precisely because it conflates epistemic and ontological considerations and superimposes judgments of truth and falsity onto objects themselves. And this is kind of an interesting thing. In the volume, I think I forgot the name of it, all these, is something on conventional truth, where a bunch of modern Madhyamaka scholars contributed. But in the introduction, they were mentioning that this distinction between Sangvriti and Paramartha was originally more like the Ngedun Drungdun distinction. It was just to distinguish statements that are sort of definitively true from statements that are only provisionally true. But you can sort of see historically how it started to get superimposed on reality itself, that there is a true reality there versus a false reality. So Rong Zompa rejects this paranoid view at the start of his Black Snake discourse. He says, directly perceived appearance is indisputably there for everyone from beginners to 10th level bodhisattvas, and that the Buddhist debates concerning such appearance arise instead over the ways in which this appearance is characterized or reified. And this brings to mind the famous teaching Tilopa gave to Naropa. He said, the problem is not with appearances, Naropa, it's with the clinging to appearances. So already in that statement, there's this idea that we're not talking about two different ontological levels of reality. We're talking about the extent to which we reify what presents itself. So in the Black Snake Discourse, which is really a fantastic text by Rong Zompa, he reprises it in his Tegchen Tsuljug as well, but it's this kind of doxography of 5 vehicles that kind of show an ascending progression of different approaches. It's a little different than the 9 vehicles, but it's overlapped somewhat. And the ascent up the ladder of Buddhist views consists in what he describes as the progressive dereification of phenomena, which culminates in the great perfection view of equality. This short text, I translated and put it online. It's you can just look up Black Snake Discourse and my name or something. I don't know if there are other ones out there, but anyways, it'll pop up. So in this really interesting work, Rong Zompa talks about these 5 ascending approaches to reality. And the metaphor he uses is that of a reflection of a black snake in water. I'm just going to jump to is it counted here because it follows my PowerPoint there. And Mikyu Dorje, in that last work I mentioned, gives a nice synopsis of the Black Snake discourse. So to summarize, on the lowest level, the Shravakas, they see the black snake reflection as real and causally efficacious. In other words, it produces results. They're afraid to touch it, but want desperately to get rid of it, so they trample it underfoot. It's explained that their fearful reaction and renunciate response to appearance stems from their ontological belief in existence, both on the ultimate and conventional levels, and also in the substantial existence, the dravya sat of both. So they're deeply mired in sort of a substantialist or realist view. Hence, they believe that the conventional and ultimate consist in separate types of truth or reality, because they're trying to get rid of the conventional and get to the ultimate. The second category, Mahayana Madhyamaka, see the reflected snake in appearances in general as illusion-like, since they're not substantially established as something real on the ultimate level. Still, they're deemed efficacious given that even unreal things, such as dream images or hallucinations, can produce harmful or beneficial effects and are thus to be accepted or rejected. So they've moved a little bit beyond the substantial existence of things, but they're still, like even dreams can have an impact. Retaining a belief in substantial existence on the conventional level, but no longer on the ultimate level, they too are afraid to touch the snake and instead take steps to repel it by applying appropriate antidotes such as compassion. This fearful reaction and remedial response to appearance stems from their intransigent ontological beliefs in conventional and nominal existence, though existence on the ultimate level has been refuted. So they too still believe in the two truths as separate, and but view the conventional as illusion-like. Adepts of the outer tantras, Kriya and Yoga for Rong, Kriya and Charya for Mikyu Dorje, because they lived, 600 years apart. So doxographies change. They perceive the snake reflection as an illusion having no substantial existence, not even on the conventional level. However, due to, quote, the power of previous fears or some kind of trauma, they too are afraid to touch it, and they summon a divine hero having the power to vanquish it. This fearful reaction and supplicatory response to appearance are based on their residual ontological belief in nominal existence on the conventional level, though existence on the ultimate level and substantial existence on the conventional level have been refuted. I know this is a lot to take, but the book will be out soon. Adepts of the lower, basically all these the distinctions between substantial and nominal existence and conventional and ultimate are being used here just to show that there's a progressive relinquishment of the habituation to things as real, being real entities. And he just kind of playfully does it using these categories. So adepts of the lower, did I do that one? The adepts of the lower inner tantras, Mahayoga and for Rongzom and Niruttara Yoga, that's the higher yoga tantras, see the snake reflection as unreal and non-efficacious, in other words, doesn't produce consequences in the world, but nonetheless engage in religious observances, vrata, aimed at removing the last traces of lingering fear and reification due to former conditioning. This reaction and yogic response to appearance are based on their nearly extinguished yet still operative ontological belief in nominal existence on the conventional level. Here, the inseparability of truth is realized to a medium extent, so they're getting closer all the time. Finally, great perfection adepts see the snake's reflection as completely unreal, insubstantial, and non-efficacious, and thus they find nothing at all to accept or reject. Since there's no longer any basis for fear, there are no logical or ontological grounds, shime, whatsoever for accepting or rejecting anything. Since all phenomena are without foundation, there's no need to respond at all. Beyond all hope and fear, acceptance and rejection, the understanding of the inseparability of truth finds its culmination. So for Rongzom and Mikyu Dorje, who, as I said, comments on this text, the final realization of inseparability of truth marks the concluding stage in the de-reification of phenomena, the point where one can no longer adduce any grounds of justification for bivalent truth conceptions. Rong here explains that all impulses to shun or destroy the snake reflection stem from a view based on clinging to real entities, the ngopor jempe tawa, the view that's, you could say, clings deeply to or is habituated to real things. Concluding that what is illusory provides no grounds, logical or empirical, to justify efforts of any kind, the adept attempts neither to reject or achieve anything at all. And the realization of the illusion-like nature of things reaches its fullest measure. To quote him, Miki Dorje, recognizing that appearances have no essential characteristics, adepts are freed of even the most subtle belief in ultimate and conventional truths, and are thus liberated from all metaphysical views. This is conventionally termed the purport of basic equality, the view of the inseparability of the ultimate and conventional. Echoing Rongzom's remarks, Miki Dorje says that, quote, practitioners of Ati Yoga, the great perfection, realize that all avoiding, fearing, touching, or trampling anything amid the joys and sorrows pertaining to the illusion-like phenomena of the two truths derive from the realist view regarding the merely illusory conventional. And he goes on to say that with this realization, they relinquish all deeds based on fear and heroism. So that was that outer tantric summoning a deity to help you get rid of all these nasty appearances. And one proceeds spontaneously without deliberate activity, without trying to achieve, establish, or reject anything. And he concludes by saying, awakening to Buddhahood, they no longer view the phenomena of the two truths as existing either nominally or conventionally. How am I doing for time, by the way? Because I'm still got time. I want to have lots of time for questions. That's not just an excuse to finish early, but one aspect of the unity of truth theorists' attempt to sort of challenge the idea of the two truths as binary was that, by and large, they grounded the two truths distinction not in objects, because some traditions, as you know, in Tibet, thought that the conventional and ultimate inhere in each object itself has a conventional aspect and an ultimate aspect. They tended more to view them as objects, vishaya, or spheres of activity, gochara, chuyul, of these modes of cognition. So they really reflect two different cognitive styles. And I've looked at this more extensively in my book on Dzogchen, Philosophical Foundations. But this, in the case of the Nyingmapas, they ground this sort of distinction in the distinction between Rigpa and Sem, or Yeshe and Sem, because it's Yeshe has as its gochara, or as its sphere of operation, ultimate truth, and ordinary, like dualistic mind, has as its sphere of operation, conventional truth. So it's clearly not a case of trying to find the conventional and ultimate out there in the world. It's rather a conventional, a distinction that's made on the conventional level to help people to be able to discern the unconditioned from the conditioned. And the well-known, the classic analogy that you all know from Chandrakirti is that of the ophthalmologist who is dealing with the person who sees these vitreous floaters. Just as a side note, on the last day I finished my rough draft of this commentary I've been working on. I got my first vitreous floater, so because I hadn't seen one before. Fortunately, they kind of go away. Your brain is able to magically. So every so often I see one if I look suddenly. And does anyone else have vitreous floaters? Yeah, they're pretty. Yeah, so it kind of said, oh, okay, that's what he's been talking about every second page. Yeah, it's crazy how much they talk about Timira or Rabrib. My wife, who's a doctor, said it's myodesopsia, the actual medical name for it. Anyways, you see tufts of hair, floating hairs. So that analogy, according to Chandrakirti, the ophthalmologist knows full well that this guy is not really seeing hairs. And in most cases, the ophthalmologist probably doesn't have floaters, although it's not beyond the realm of possibility that he would have floaters too. But anyways, he's able to nonetheless talk about floaters because he knows that that's a condition that people can have. And then he can sort of encourage the person to not think there are real hairs out there floating around. And also maybe encourage him to have some medical intervention. So this analogy is just to help understand that the distinction between conventional and ultimate is definitely not an ontological distinction out there in the world. It's a way to help people who aren't seeing things as they are to understand how and why that's the case. So in the Nyingma tradition, it's often the distinction between Sem Yeshe or Sem Rigpa. In the Kagyu tradition, it's often Namshe Yeshe. And there are a lot of great writings on both of these. So central to this viewpoint is the insight that how things appear is a feature both of how things are and how we stand in relation to what is. This way of interpreting the two truths was hardly unprecedented because we find, these thinkers often quote Shantideva's from the 9th chapter. I forget which stanza, but that the conventional is the sphere of the ordinary mati or ordinary mind. And so for unity theorists, this distinction of truths in terms of cognitive styles was also consistent with their own disclosive view of the Buddhist path. So in this view, the conventional, or sometimes translated as concealing or superficial, depending on which of the many senses of sangvriti you go with, it's simply a blanket term for the set of dualizing and distorting mental acts that are collectively called mind. The goal then is to give up mistaken identifications of appearance, including illegitimate attributions of truth and falsity thereof, and leave appearance be. Just to give one quotation of what this looks like in terms of sort of the higher tantric view of the inseparability of the two truths, I'll quote from Longchenpa's Wish-Fulfilling Treasury commentary, the Pema Karpo. He says, since this luminous primordial knowing, that's Yeshe, is not touched by cloud-like conventional samsaric phenomena, not the slightest mistaken appearance is established. If that's not established, then one also does not establish an ultimate evaluated as the emptiness of all that is perceived. Since neither of these is established, none of the distinctions between two truths as evaluated by the philosophical systems are established. Given that these do not exist, one goes beyond the two truths as they are intellectually imputed in terms of what is true and false. With this pacification of all discursive elaborations, imputed truth is no longer established. Hence we speak of the inseparability of truth. I think I do have a slide. I should have put that up there a while ago. Yeah, okay. No, I don't know where it is. No, okay. So, there's one more line. Since there's nothing describable as conventionally established but ultimately unestablished, this luminous primordial knowing as the basic expanse is called great, utterly pure spontaneity. However, since it does not exist as anything like the two truths of appearance and emptiness acknowledged in the philosophical systems, it is, in this sense, also called the inseparability of truth. So there's kind of an interesting shift in thinking where truth, in this sense, is no longer truth as correspondence, like the confirmation or disconfirmation between propositions and states of affairs, but they're pointing to a more elementary form of truth as disclosure. It's what the term aletheia in Greek has that sense of unconcealment, which is simply the display of a state of affairs and therefore the condition of possibility of propositional truth. So they're trying to get at what is there before we try to distinguish the way things are from the way things seem to be. For unity truth theorists more generally, this alethic shift from propositional to pre-propositional models of truth coincides with the soteriological or path move from representational thought to primordial knowing, because we're dealing now with truth not as as it's represented, but as it presents itself. And finally, I'll look at what implications this unity of truth thesis might have for our understanding of the two truths. When it's recognized that propositional truths depend on perception as a condition of their possibility, and this in turn upon phenomena, it becomes understandable how readily cognitive judgments of truth and falsity can be tacitly re-enlisted to distinguish ontologically the way things appear from the way things really are. So in other words, you're taking something that applies to propositions. They can be true or false. It's snowing outside can be true or false. But then it kind of shifts to how you ontologically understand phenomena, that there's some kind of level of reality that's obscured, and there's one that's true. So all too easily, a model of reality slides into the reality of the model. We may recall that for Rong, the real bone of contention for wayfaring Buddhists is not appearance itself, the naive evidence of things available to everyone from beginners to 10th level bodhisattvas. I'm leaving out the Buddha level because it's quite exotic and needs its own treatment, because some people say there's no thought at all, there's no perception, there's nothing. That's really contentious, and there's a lot of interesting debates over that. But anyways, the concern is rather with how appearances are characterized, that is, reified. In his conclusion to the Black Snake, Rong clarifies the conditions for the genesis and transcendence of this reification of appearance. He says, because directly perceived appearance has arisen due to the power of latent tendencies, these vasanas, it's not quickly overcome. Because habituation to such appearance is produced by adventitious or temporary erroneous ideas, it can be quickly overcome. So that's good news, that these adventitious things can be dealt with. He adds that, quote, this habituation moreover arises from belief in characteristics. That in turn arises from the view of real entities. But when these three conceptions subside, then even if appearance based on the essentialist conception is not ceased, there will still not arise the metaphysical view of truth as dual. So Rong is unsparing in his diagnosis. Buddhist philosophers from Sarvastivadins up to Madhyamakas remain to varying degrees wedded to the dichotomy between erroneous conventional appearance and veridical ultimate reality, with the resulting bifurcation between the worlds of human beings and Aryas. The upshot of his critique is that traditional bivalent views of truth, with their putative dichotomy between false appearance, that is total error, and true reality, that is total absence, emptiness, serve more to reinforce than resolve these pernicious metaphysical dichotomies. As Rong explains, a person in whose mind defining characteristics of the two truths are intellectually posited as something truly established and are thus determined to be objects of knowledge will never be able to relinquish dualistic mind. For when that person is determined that the two truths are inseparable, with this deeply held belief, he also has not let go of holding that conventional exists as mere illusion. That being so, even when he establishes the non-dual nature of reality, he still harbors thoughts associated with dualism. It's kind of an interesting psychological thing, like just trying to understand what is it, what's that sort of instinctive impulse to cling on to, things as real. So this brings us finally to the question of whether in the Buddhist project of dispelling the manifold forms of self-deception and ignorance that are thought to prevent human beings from seeing things as they really are, yatha bhuta, the two truths doctrine is part of the solution or part of the problem. In other words, is the distinction best regarded as a remedy for dualistic perceptions, or rather, to quote Karl Kraus, the famous Austrian satirist, whether they're the illness for which it purports to be the cure? Rong, for one, seems to side with Karl Kraus. He says, determining objects of knowledge by fixating the mind on the subdivision of the two truths was declared to be a remedy for people who cling excessively to real entities. However, phenomena are essentially without such bivalent characteristics. So there's no such, dual characteristics to be found anywhere. Indeed, one in whom the belief in such characteristics has ceased is free from such clinging there, and therefore no longer craves or wishes for anything that appears. In that instance, the term view of great equality is employed. And Mikya Dorje signals agreement when he comments that the mind will never be able to settle in the lofty state of the unity of the two truths so long as it has not let go of objectifying them by means of conceptual analysis. So my final conclusion here, the problem with bivalent truth theories is that they ontologize a useful phenomenological distinction and embed it in the nature of things. Because unity theorists argue that the conventional and ultimate are not categorically distinct, that appearance is not different in kind and essence from reality, it follows that the unity of truth is a matter of discovery rather than achievement. Simply put, the original unity of presence and emptiness is a precondition for any distinction between them. For Mikya Dorje, the unity of truth revealed in Mahamudra meditation is not a conjunction of two disparate phenomena, as the term Yuganada would seem to imply. A lot of these people, Yungampa as well, because the term Zungjug can give the impression of, it actually kind of means like yoking together two oxen. It comes from that idea of fusing two things together. But they're often arguing that this is a real misunderstanding, that what we're dealing with is a primordial inseparability. So it's not a conjunction of two disparate phenomena, but neither is it a commensurability established between two equally existent states of affairs or objects of knowledge. Rather, the two truths are inseparable in the specific sense that they stand to one another in a relationship of asymmetrical priority, such that the ultimate, the emptiness or the unconditioned, is the condition of possibility of conventional dependent, the conditioned, but is not itself a conditioned product. So this is trying to think two dynamic ideas into a single notion, because you have on the one hand something that approaches like a dialectical monism, where you have basically a one world view, but they really don't want to go all the way in that direction, because as I said, then you end up collapsing sentient beings and Buddhas into being the same, and but the alternative strong dualistic view keeps them forever separate. So in many ways, this unity of truth or inseparability of truth idea goes very well together with the idea that you find already in really early Dzogchen materials, that the Buddhas and sentient beings are of the same continuum or the same mind, because they were trying to, explicitly or implicitly, they were trying to reject this idea of a complete separation between the world of the noble ones and the worlds of us ordinary united sentient beings. So I think I'll just end on that and leave time for some questions. Oh yeah, I'm a little early. That's okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions from the...
Thank you so much. Really, really interesting. I'm curious what you think about how these so-called unity theorists, especially in the Dzogchen and Mahamudra traditions, sort of end up with a similar set of problems when they operate with a dichotomy of recognizing Rigpa, for instance, or not recognizing, because there you sort of impose a split again. Like, is that resolved, or do you just kick the can further down the road? Or
I think they seem to like kicking the can. But the reason I say that is, and this is kind of a general observation, I think some of these creative tensions you find, they keep alive for a very good reason, because like this, say the differentiation model versus the unity model. The problem with going too strongly in either of those directions is you end up in the kind of dichotomous view. And so what you're saying really reminds me of some of Mikyo Dorje's comments, because he, in this one short text that's a drilen, like answers to, it's called Kampa something drilen. May have been a Kampa, I'm not sure, or the guy's name was Kampa. But anyways, he is asked, well, is there one mind? Mikyo Dorje is asked, is there one mind or two? Because you're always talking about Sem and, or like Namshe, Yeshe. And he goes on to make a distinction between Lobergi Sem, like a adventitious mind, and Nelme Sem, like a innate mind. But then he says that they're neither entirely separate or entirely the same. And he describes them as two concurrent but non-convergent streams of consciousness. So within each mental continuum, you have a pre-representational, non-thematic stream and a presentational, non-thematic. So you have representational, pre-representational, let's put it that way. And they're going on at the same time. So for a sentient being to become a Buddha, it's simply to allow the non-dualistic, non-reifying mode of awareness to come to the fore and sort of just dissolve the dualistic structure of mind. But yeah, they keep this attention alive, I think, just because it's the reasoning is until you become an actual realized being, you still need to recognize that there are these kind of distinctions between dualistic mind and primordial knowing, or between the conventional truth and ultimate truth. But they always are very quick to point out that all these distinctions are made on the level of conventional or customary truth, if that helps.
I'll ask one question that comes up in classes, so this might be interesting for some students. You talked about the doxography changing over time. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, well, I wish I knew more about how it changed over time. It's just that, like in the earlier period, there wasn't really even an Anu Yoga, for example, and you had your Kriya Charya. But Tibetans love doxography, and they found ways of traditions that didn't even give themselves a name were given names. Like Prasangika doesn't exist in any Indian source. It was very creatively, used to describe a certain line of Madhyamaka thought. So yeah, I wish it'd be a great study for someone to look at how these different doxographical character rubrics changed over the centuries. But in this context, like Rong Zompa uses certain terms for tantric traditions that by Mikyo Dorje's time was no longer as relevant, because by then they had the Lana Mepe Gyu as the culminating one, and that was kind of the way that one changed. But it's a big question. Yeah.
Thank you. Sure. Any other questions or comments, maybe from online? Do we need to unmute them, or? One of them is, I have about 1 million questions. Would it be possible for me to use my mic? Yes, you can.
Thanks so much, Dion. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we
Great.
do.
David, thanks so much for a really brilliant, wonderful talk. I'm so sorry that I can't be there in person right now. I wrote down a lot of the phrases that you use, just really, really beautiful stuff. I'll try to be quick, but we should just talk more. Karsa, really fast. Orna Almogi does really good work on identifying the strands of Madhyamaka that existed at sort of the end of Indian Madhyamaka, the Mayapamavada and the Pratishthanavada, right? So I would suggest your students look at that as well. But basically, two things. The notion of a middle way between Dopalpa and Tsongkhapa, I don't know if Garampa invented it, but he certainly prefigures Mikyo Dorje a little bit by introducing it. And I wonder what the interaction between those two is. And Yogacara is just everywhere here. It's insane. I looked at the black snake and saw that Rongzom basically lumps Yogacara in with the Shravakas. But the Yogacaras introduced a third nature, in my understanding, precisely so that they didn't have to make the distinction that's a problem for Madhyamaka, is the one you're talking about. Is it two things or is it one thing? Well, in a three-layer model, you don't actually have that problem. At least that's what Ratnakar Shanti argued. So I'm curious if you'd talk a little bit about Mikyo Dorje and Garampa and a little bit about kind of what you see as the role of Yogacara and the three natures in here.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Who am I talking to, by the way?
Oh, I'm so sorry. This is Daniel.
Yeah.
Daniel McNamara.
Oh, Daniel, great. Yeah, no, yeah, I did. One thing I mentioned in the paper that I just didn't get around to mentioning here is the importance of Garampa, and I think, like you say, being the first one to really sort of use the Jonang and the Gelugpas as kind of epitomizing the two trends toward nihilism and eternalism in some cases, or existence and non-existence. And that, I think you're right, like, and it's not often acknowledged where they got that from, that people like, well, a whole bunch of Karma Kagyu masters like Karma Tinley and the seventh Karmapa, Chudrag Gyamtso, and then Mikyo Dorje and a whole bunch of others, they kind of just go with that. Just it's sort of a convenient way to set up two extreme positions you want to avoid and pin those on the proponents of those traditions. And the Apratisthanavada tradition, which Rongzom and Mikyo Dorje are very partial to, it's the full name is Sarva Dharma Apratisthanavada, means those who maintain that all phenomena are without any foundation. Very, very similar in view to the Nisvabhavavadans, the idea that there are no intrinsic natures to any phenomena. So they differ very little in the basic view. I would say that the big difference is in their different means of practice, because the proponents of the Apratisthanavada were late, like 11th century tantric Madhyamakas, whereas the Nisvabhavavadas were just the Madhyamakas in India going back to Nagarjuna. But yeah, these categories became very complex, partly because, at the time when some of these tantric traditions were still coming from India and names were being given to them, Tibetans were trying to sort of coordinate and reconcile these different traditions. And the Apratisthanavada tradition, for example, was rejected by some traditions. Tsongkhapa didn't recognize its legitimacy. I think that goes back to Patsab. Others warmly welcomed it because it was a tradition of Saraha, Maitripa, and so forth. So yeah, but it became very complex, and even how different Tibetan masters identified which particular sects or groups that could be, or even scholars, these categories could be applied to, differed greatly from one scholar to another. In that Madhyamaka in the Middle Way volume, the first volume, Tina and I tried to sort out who associated these categories with which scholars and traditions. But it's Orna's work on that stuff is really helpful as a starting point, at least. Did I answer both questions? Yeah, try to.
I had if there's time, unless other people have their hands raised.
Sure.
I wanted to ask about Rongzompa and Mikyo Dorje on the three natures, how they differentiate themselves from Yogacara, just the idea that these are all creative solutions to a problem that's kind of uniquely a Madhyamaka problem. And the Yogacaras say, yeah, that's why we have a third nature. That's why we have a dependent nature.
Yeah, I don't know Rongzom's position. Mika Dorje's is fresh in my mind just because I've been working on it, but it's very complex. He basically doesn't see the need for that model, but his reasoning is more because of internal inconsistencies. He says some regard the parinishpana as being empty of the other two, especially the Shenwang or the Paratantra category, which was so strongly criticized by Chandrakirti, probably not always in a justifiable way. But he builds on that. But it's all very complex, and he. I think it's kind of like Occam's razor. He just wants to keep it quite simple. That you just need to, on the conventional level, distinguish the conventional from the ultimate. But but he doesn't see much merit in the three natures. But that said, like a lot of these thinkers who claim to be Prasangika Madhyamakas nonetheless use a ton of Yogacara psychology and the understanding of Alaya Vijnana. They just sort of parameterize it in different ways. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David, for this. Is this working? Yes, like this. I have a question that aims at connecting the philosophy with the practice. In the description of deity yoga, the highest approach is also characterized as sungjuk, an integration of the kirim and zokurim phase. In the study of these texts by Rongzom and Mikyo Dorje, are there attempts to link the philosophy to ways to put it in practice in the context of tantric deity yoga? Could you talk to that a bit?
Yeah, I'm more familiar with, again, Mikyo Dorje, because Rongzompa doesn't, his collected writings are much shorter, but I'm sure he's got a lot to say about it. But Mikyo Dorje does connect it with practice, especially in his last major work, the Kusum Ngotra Namshe. And he makes distinctions between conventional deity and ultimate deity as well. And it's all in the context of practice. I would definitely look in that last great work of his, which is completely based on the higher tantras. But yeah, can you ask maybe which specific part of the deity practice? Yeah.
Well, I'm not quite sure how to put the question, but since the approach to viewing conventional reality versus ultimate reality has these different facets, does that have an impact on how yogis practice deity yoga? Can one approach deity yoga also in different ways based on one's philosophical background?
Oh yeah, that's I think actually Rongzompa and Mipam really do make some interesting distinctions, and I think Longchenpa too, who is a huge inspiration for Mipam, in the sense that as you move from the lower tantras to the higher tantras, there's much more of a growing inseparability with the deity. And I guess the view of basic equality or great equality or great purity, that the term that Rongzompa and Mipam both use so often is at this level where, and it is an illustration of the inseparability of truth doctrine. It's just that to see the world as divine is not some sort of hallucination or imagination. It's actually more the way things are. So again, I think it has to do with this idea of the habituation to seeing things as real entities, having real properties. As that sort of realism subsides, then to start to see the world in a divine way, or the deity as like water poured into water, or no longer a separation, like a master-servant thing that's in the lower tantras. That's really what they are actually meaning by the inseparability of the two truths. It's a very deep doctrine. I mean, I'm just really skimming the surface of it, but that's how they sort of see that. That's why like for Rong and Long Chenpa, it's really only in Mantrayana that you come to see the inseparability of the two truths, because that's when you see that phenomena are pure by nature, or a state of great equality. And so deity practice is no longer just like an imaginative exercise, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you again. I just wanted to ask about, you kind of briefly mentioned in the Nyingma, with the debate of dualist mind, I guess, the Sim Yeshe and the Sim Rigpa. Can you just go into like a brief kind of overview of the framing of why it's sometimes framed as Yeshe and sometimes Rigpa?
That's a deep topic too. One way to look at it from a very external kind of point of view is that I think Sim Rigpa is more indigenously Tibetan, for one thing. The way Rigpa is used, for example, although you can say, okay, it's a translation of Vidya, but it's got its own entire sort of way of understanding it that's very distinctively Tibetan. Whereas the Sim Yeshe enabled, some of these scholar practitioners like Long Chenpa and others to relate the Abhidharma categories that sort of explain mind and mental factors, like the Chitta Chaita, and then all the modes of Yeshe, or Jnana, which were known in India, the 5 types of Jnana. So it gave them kind of just a different framework of traditions to draw upon. But in terms of the actual difference between Yeshe and Rigpa, it's a really complex topic, because you could say Rangjung Yeshe is maybe Rigpa, but not say the Sosur Tokpe Yeshe, like they're not used completely interchangeably, because they're drawing on different traditions. And I would say, like, because the Mahamudra, for example, was a very much an Indian tradition that got assimilated in Tibet, it made sense to stay with Namshe Yeshe usually. They'll use the term Rigpa in some of the Mahamudra writings, but in terms of making that distinction, because Jnana just has such a long history in India with all the different types of Yeshe or Jnana as well. Whereas Rigpa really has a flavor all of its own that's really indigenous in Tibet. Like terms like Rigpa, Rongtsel, and these are really, you'd have to try hard to find any Indian source for those kind of understandings.
Does Rongsampa make any differentiation between the tantric Madhyamaka view and sutra tradition Madhyamaka view as something superior or inferior? Because in other Tibetan Buddhism Madhyamaka school, they do have some debate on this topic. So this is my first question. And second question, is there any differentiation between the integration and union? Because in Tibetan term, we have 2 specific terms, Song to Delwa and Song to Jukpa. So Song to Jukpa mainly means union, and Song to Delwa could be also understand in a union, but more in the sense integration.
Okay.
Yeah. So what do you think of it?
I'll take the second question first because it's fresh in my mind. No, that's really interesting. And although sometimes like these scholars will just mention Yerme and Zungjug and Nime almost as synonymous. Zungjug has a particular sense, like you said, of meaning unity, not just a putting together. And so some, like I remember Young Gampa says that we shouldn't understand by Zongjuk that it's trying to put two different things together, because the unity he's talking about is already Nangtong Yerme or is Nangtong Zongjuk. It's all already there. And but the Zongduk Drelwa I don't see as much. Is that used, is that a translation also of Yoganada? Is that the one you said? There is Zongduk Jawa. Yeah. Two. And the Zongduk Jawa means more integration. Yeah.
The term itself means relation.
Yes, Jawa. Union together. Yeah. No, that's very interesting. There were a lot of discussions about the Zongduk Jukba and how to understand it. More like the Yerme understanding and then putting together. Sorry, the first question. Remind. Oh yeah, the Rongzom. Well, Rongzom says the Raptuminepa Uma is the special Mahayana, but it's a special doctrine that's. I've got the quotation somewhere. He said it's not only in non-tantric traditions, but also tantric. But I don't know his writings well enough to know whether he considers that superior to the Ngo Nidki, the Nisva Bhavavada. Do you know if he ever says that the Raptuminepa is superior to the Ngovo Nikimepa, the Nisva Bhavavada, the Nagarjuna tradition? Does he consider, because it was a tantric tradition, so he would evaluate it, maybe even if the view is the same, the kinds of practices I think would be considered. Yeah. Not sure. Yeah.
So the view of Raptuminepa is that view of both these.
Please, the online people need to.
Oh, yeah.
So Raptuminepa view of Rongzompa is that applied to both the sutra tradition of Madhyamaka and the tantric Madhyamaka? Is there and there's something more, another Madhyamaka view in tantra than that?
Yeah, no, I think it's associated with the tantric view, because it came from people like Maitripa and Yanasiddhi and Yanagarbha. It came from a lot of these late tantric masters, and that's one reason it was rejected by Patsab and Tsongkhapa, because it was a late category that wasn't, it's surprising actually how Rongzompa knew about it, because he's quite early, because it was just coming into Tibet around that time, the Maitripa tradition, and but it was associated with sort of a Mantrayana form of Madhyamaka. And so my understanding is, for that reason, it was considered, maybe to be beyond Sutrayana. But still, the view is the same, though, as that there's no intrinsic nature. To say there's no foundation or no nature comes down to a similar view. I think that's my sense.
Any more questions? Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for the talk. I have a small question. So Rongzompa wrote some commentaries on Chandrakirti's works, yeah? Sorry. Yeah. So Rongzompa wrote some commentaries on Chandrakirti's works, and he uses the Chandrakirti's view as kind of to deconstruct the inherited existence. From your this lecture, did you mention about this part? Is a separate topic that we are covering regarding this same person, or we're so the simple question is that does Rangzomba has a view of prasangika?
Yeah, that's similar to what he asked as well. I don't know that he goes into it so much because his main focus is a pratistana vada, this raptime nepe uma, which you find in a lot of the late Indian Mantrayana works, especially the tradition of Saraha. They distinguish different types of raptime nepa, the zungjug raptime nepa, and there's a fourfold distinction that in Karma Tinlei's commentary on the Doha Kosha he goes into. But I don't know enough about Rongzom's, the way he treats the typical prasangika, position of, or the typical Madhyamaka even, because he really embraced the distinction between raptime nepa and the gyuma tabu, the mayopa mavada. These became his way to distinguish the Madhyamaka tradition. But I'll have to look more closely in some of his works, like the Tegchen Tsuljuk. He may give a more detailed doxography of those categories as well. Like the raptime nepa was not warmly embraced by all Tibetans either, so maybe he felt it necessary to emphasize its importance at that time. Yeah.
Can I ask it?
Sure.
So in Mipan, which is commentary on the Mipan, which is commentary on the Umagyen. In the introduction part, which is quite a long one, and there he specifically mentioned that the ultimate from the two truths, the ultimate the ultimate truth, the highest view of the ultimate truth is prasangika, so he talking about two truths as Tanyes and Dunden Uma or Uma Tenjabas.
Right.
So, and then my question is, you mentioned that the Prasangika view is as eternalism. Is that what you just said? Sorry if I
didn't mean to if I said.
Yeah.
No. So. I think I was saying that there's still, according to these people like Rongzom, Mikyo, Dorje, Longchenpa, they say that within Prasangika, they're still dealing with propositional truth in terms of the true and versus the false. But that's not like eternalism. It's just because you have to remember, like even the people like Mikyo, Dorje, Longchenpa claim to be Prasangika. That's their main Indian Buddhist philosophical affiliation, but they consider it's a stepping stone to Vajrayana. It's not, even though in the Ijinzo, it's treated as a goal, a path with its own path and goal and everything, but still it's you go beyond the Vajrayana, and then the view changes. So even though they would say the view remains prasangika throughout, the means of understanding, like the different practices, change. That's usually the way they say that there's a consistency in the view, but just different modes of realization. Yeah. And they always have a section saying, giving the why is Mantrayana superior to Sutrayana. And yeah, so even if they consider the prasangika view of the emptiness of all entities to be consistent throughout all of the stages or the yanas, it's still the different means of practice. Yeah, there's a change in those kind of means of realization. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I guess we're at the end of questions. Unless there is a last comment, would you like to close with a few remarks?
Oh, I'm all done.
You're all done. All right.
All remarked out.
All right. So this actually concludes our series of public talks for this semester. So we've gone through the whole series. There is a new series coming up for the spring, so please keep your eyes open. And Julia will be presenting on pilgrimage to Yolmo. Fascinating work. Maria will talk about translation at the age of AI. And there will be other people, possibly a short course on Tibetan Sanskrit mantras, how to decode them with Lama Kunga Zangpo, old monk from here. So please stay tuned with the series coming up starting in January, and looking forward to see you again.
Thank you for all coming, and nice to see you.